Arthritis pain chewed at my bones as I punched the garage keypad. But the light blinked red right before my son Lachlan spoke dryly from just behind my aching back. "The doc says you're getting confused and your hands are shot. I locked it up for your own safety." I rubbed my swollen thumb joint. He was lying through his teeth. "Last night, I pulled the memory card from a dash cam I'd temporarily rigged to the 1969 Pontiac GTO's battery and heard him and his wife making a deal. 120 grand to wipe out their mortgage. The bitter irony is I signed the title over to him 2 years ago as a birthday gift. Legally, he held all the cards. Emotionally, he treated me like scrap metal. He figured a crippled old man would just stand by and watch a dealer tow the car away. He forgot who actually owns the soul of that machine. If your own flesh and blood weaponized your generosity to back you into a corner, would you take it lying down, or would you rip back what matters most? Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me how you'd fight back right before I reveal what really went down on my final night in the shop. The cold concrete of the garage floor was doing my knees no favors, but the real problem was my hands. I had the hood of the '69 Pontiac GTO propped open, staring down at the Ram Air IV V8 engine. It was a masterpiece of old Detroit muscle, something I'd spent the last 5 years bringing back to life. I reached in to tighten a bracket on the alternator, but my grip gave out. The wrench slipped. My knuckles smashed against the raw metal of the engine block. I didn't curse. I just pulled my hand back, closed my eyes, and rode out the familiar, throbbing ache of stage 3 rheumatoid arthritis. The doctor called it progressive. I just called it a thief. I wiped the grease off my fingers with a red shop rag just as the motion sensor light flicked on near the side door. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. A second later, the door swung open. It was my son, Lachlan, wearing his standard medical sales uniform, a quarter-zip sweater and slacks. Right behind him was Serafina, holding a beige canvas tote bag and a tray of something that looked like cardboard cut into squares. "Dad, it's freezing out here," Lachlan said, rubbing his arms. "You shouldn't be out in the damp like this. It's bad for your joints." "I was just tracking down a parasitic draw on the battery," I said, keeping my voice level. "Keeps dying overnight. I hardwired my old dashcam straight into the fuse box to see if the voltage drops when I'm not looking." Serafina set her tote bag down on my cluttered workbench, carefully avoiding a puddle of brake fluid. She looked at the GTO like it was a stray dog that had wandered into a nice restaurant. "We brought you some gluten-free oat bars," she said, offering a tight, camera-ready smile. "Inflammation, Orson. You really need to watch your inflammation. The processed stuff you eat is just eating your cartilage alive." "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it." I didn't tell her that working on this car was the only thing keeping my mind sharp. Lachlan walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was a little too firm, the way you hold someone when you're trying to steer them. "You've got to slow down, Dad. Seriously, look at your hands. You're shaking. You can't even push the heavy clutch on this thing anymore. You're going to blow out your knee or worse. Crash it. I can drive my own car, Lachlan. Technically, it's my car," he said softly. He didn't say it with malice. He said it with a quiet sort of reason that hurt worse than a shout. 2 years ago, on his 32nd birthday, I signed the title over to him. It was meant to be a legacy. A promise that when I was gone, a piece of my soul would sit in his garage. "Legally, yes," I said, "but the restoration isn't finished." "Just take a break," Lachlan said, squeezing my shoulder one last time. "Come inside. Eat something that isn't out of a can." I nodded, feeling suddenly very old. "Let me just unhook the battery lead. I'll be in right behind you." They headed back toward the house. As Serafina grabbed her tote bag off the workbench, a small folded piece of paper fluttered out of the side pocket and landed under a stack of sandpaper. She didn't notice. The door clicked shut behind them. I walked over, picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was a piece of hotel stationery. In Lachlan's messy handwriting there was a single line of text: Pontiac GTO 69, Gideon R, 120K. I stared at the numbers. My chest tightened, a slow creeping pressure that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with my gut. Gideon Rourke was a high-end classic car broker in the county, a guy known for swooping in, buying matching numbers cars for cash, and flipping them to overseas collectors. I folded the paper and slipped it into my flannel shirt pocket. I told myself I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe Lachlan just wanted to know what the car was worth for insurance purposes. He was a practical kid. I had to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was my blood. I leaned over the fender, pulled the SD card out of the rigged dashcam, and headed into the house. Dinner was quiet. Serafina talked about her social media metrics. Lachlan checked his phone under the table every 5 minutes, his knee bouncing against the table leg. He looked tired, stretched thin. I knew they had bought that big house in the new subdivision on an adjustable rate mortgage, and I knew the rates had just adjusted hard. But a man's pride is a fragile thing, and a father shouldn't poke at his son's failures. So I just ate my oat bars and went to bed early. At midnight, sitting at the small desk in my bedroom, I slotted the SD card into my laptop. I just wanted to check the voltage logs. I clicked on the video file from 3 hours ago, right before they walked into the garage. The garage was dark on the video, lit only by the faint glow of the motion sensor light kicking on when they stepped in. I couldn't see much, but the audio was crystal clear. "It smells like toxic waste in here," Serafina's voice whispered through the laptop speakers. "Just keep your voice down," Lachlan replied. "Did you talk to Gideon?" "Yeah. He's bringing the flatbed on Thursday. 120 grand, cash wire. It's done, Sarah." I stopped breathing. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen washing over my face. "Thank God," Serafina sighed. "That covers the balloon payment and completely zeroes out my Amex. I swear, Lachlan, if we lose the house because your dad wants to play mechanic with a pile of junk, I am taking the kids and going to my mother's." "We're not losing the house," Lachlan said, his voice carrying a strained, desperate edge. "I'm handling it. It's my car anyway. He gave me the title. He's going to fight you on it." "No, he won't. Look, I talked to Dr. Evans today. I told him Dad's been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, getting confused in the driveway. The doctor agreed it's time to start limiting his access to heavy machinery. Tomorrow, while he's napping, I'm calling the locksmith. We change the keypad code on the garage. We lock him out. Is that legal?" "It's for his own protection, Sarah. He's got terrible arthritis. He's not thinking straight. He can't safely operate that car. We're doing him a favor. He'll be angry for a week, and then he'll forget about it. It's fine. It's the right thing to do." The recording clicked off as they walked out of the frame. I sat completely still for a long time. The silence in the bedroom was absolute. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the laptop against the wall. I just looked down at my hands, at the swollen joints and the grease stained into the calluses. He wasn't acting out of malice. That was the worst part. He had convinced himself that robbing me of my dignity, my passion, and my property was an act of mercy. He had justified burying me alive just to bail out his own sinking ship. He was going to use my failing body as the excuse to steal my soul. I closed the laptop. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet. I walked outside, the morning dew soaking through my boots. The air was crisp, smelling of wet pine and distant exhaust. I walked straight to the garage side door and reached out to punch in my code. The keypad didn't beep. The small light at the top blinked a solid, unforgiving red. I tried again. Red. I took a step back and looked at the door. Taped right above the handle, in a fresh plastic sleeve, was a printed piece of paper. "Unsafe area. Full hazard." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message from Lachlan. "Hey Dad. The door lock jammed yesterday, so I had a guy come replace the system. The doctor said you need to stay away from the heavy tools anyway with your hands acting up. Just keeping you safe. I'll come by this weekend and we'll watch a game." I looked from the phone to the locked door of my own garage. The car inside wasn't just a machine. It was a Ram Air IV V8 engine that I had bought with my own money, rebuilt with my own hands, and placed inside a shell I had legally given away. Lachlan owned the shell. He thought he owned the heart. I slid the phone back into my pocket, turned around, and started walking toward the edge of town, where a guy named Barnaby Finch ran a scrapyard. If my son wanted to play the long game, he was about to learn where he got his stubborn streak from. "It's a civil matter, Mr. Cale." Officer Miller's voice came through my phone speaker, flattened by the dispatcher's radio static and a heavy dose of bureaucratic exhaustion. I sat on my front porch, watching the morning fog cling to the overgrown weeds in my front yard. "He changed the keypad code on my own garage, Miller," I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry over to the neighbors. "I've got $10,000 worth of snap-on tools in there. I just want access to my equipment." "Who holds the title to the vehicle inside the garage, Orson?" I closed my eyes and leaned back against the peeling paint of the porch railing. "Lachlan, I signed it over to him 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a gift for when I passed. If his name is on the pink slip, it's legally his property. He has the right to secure it." Miller paused, and I heard the faint rustle of paperwork on his end. "Look, off the record, he actually called the precinct first thing this morning. Filed a preemptive report. Said you've been experiencing some cognitive decline, and he was worried you might try to operate heavy machinery. He told us he locked it up for your own safety." A bitter taste flooded the back of my throat. Lachlan was building a paper trail. He wasn't just stealing the car, he was legally establishing me as an incompetent old man to cover his tracks. "Did he mention he's selling it to a broker on Thursday for 120 grand? I asked quietly. "He didn't mention a sale, Orson. I'm sorry. Unless there's a physical altercation or a clear-cut theft of something with your name on the receipt, my hands are tied. You have to take this to a civil court." "Right. Thanks, Miller." I hung up. Before I could even slip the phone back into my pocket, the screen lit up with a text message. It was from Lachlan. "Hey, Dad. Had to run to the office early. I talked to the local PD just to make sure we're doing everything by the book with the property. Dr. Evans really thinks this is the best move for your joints and your head right now. I know you're upset, but I'm not doing this to hurt you. It's proactive. We'll get lunch this weekend, my treat. Love you." I stared at the glowing words. The corporate empathy, the calculated, patronizing warmth. He was treating me like a difficult client he was trying to phase out of a contract. I hit the call button on his contact. It rang exactly half a time before routing straight to voicemail. He had blocked my number. He locked me out of my shop, labeled me a liability to the cops, and then shut the door on any argument. He thought he had completely boxed me in. I stood up, my knees popping in the damp air. I didn't go back inside. I walked down the driveway, turned left, and started the 2-mile trek toward the industrial side of town. Barnaby Finch ran a salvage yard that sat on a patch of poisoned dirt right beside the old railway line. The air over there always smelled like oxidized iron, stale beer, and ozone. When I walked through the chain-link gates, Barnaby was sliding out from under a rusted F-150 on a wooden creeper. He wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag that was dirtier than his jeans and squinted at me. "You look like you just swallowed a spark plug, Orson," he said, tossing the rag onto a stack of bald tires. "I need a beer, Barnaby, and I need a favor." We sat in his cramped aluminum office trailer. The AC unit in the window rattled like a dying asthmatic. I popped the tab on a can of cheap lager and laid it all out for him. The dashcam recording, Serafina's credit card debt, the adjustable rate mortgage that was about to swallow my son alive, the broker, Gideon Rourke. Barnaby listened in complete silence. He was a man who understood the language of rust and ruin better than human conversation. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his beer. "He's got you dead to rights on the paperwork, Orson," Barnaby said, his voice like gravel grinding under a tire. Title is king. Cops won't touch it, and a lawyer will take 6 months just to file a motion. By Thursday, that car is in a shipping container headed to Dubai. He owns the shell, I said, tracing the condensation on the outside of my aluminum can. I gave him the title to a 1969 Pontiac GTO. That's what the VIN number on the dash says. Barnaby frowned, deep lines cutting into his leathery face. Yeah, and the engine currently sitting in that engine bay isn't the one that came with the shell. It's a Ram Air IV V8. I bought it as a bare block from a guy up in Cleveland 3 years ago. Paid cash, but the original invoice is in a filing cabinet in my bedroom, made out to Orson Kale. I built that motor from the ground up. Barnaby stopped rocking in his chair. A slow, dark understanding settled over his features. Gideon Rourke is a matching numbers guy. He only pays 6 figures if the heart matches the skin. Exactly. I leaned forward. Lachlan thinks he's selling a complete masterpiece. He doesn't know the first thing about classic car valuation. He thinks a shiny paint job and a loud exhaust is what makes it worth 120 grand. If that V8 isn't under the hood, the car is just a pretty piece of sheet metal. It's worth maybe 30 grand to a hobbyist. Nowhere near enough to cover his balloon payment. Barnaby rubbed his jaw. You still got that cracked 400 block sitting under the tarp in my shed? The one with the blown head gasket? Fits the mounts perfectly. Looks close enough to the untrained eye if you don't check the casting numbers with a flashlight. I can bring my flatbed truck around your alley tonight, Barnaby said quietly. Bring the hydraulic cherry picker. But Orson, your hands. You can barely hold a beer can right now without shaking. You can't pull an engine swap in the pitch dark. They don't have to hold a wrench forever, I said, looking down at my swollen knuckles. Just for tonight. At exactly midnight, the neighborhood was dead quiet. The air had dropped 10 degrees, making the dull ache in my joints flare into a sharp, burning agony. Barnaby parked his truck 2 streets over, and we wheeled the heavy iron cherry picker down the back alley, keeping to the shadows. When we reached my garage, the red light on the digital keypad glowed like a taunt in the dark. Lachlan was a smart kid, but he was a corporate guy. He lived his life through apps and wireless updates. He didn't know that when I hung this heavy-duty steel door 15 years ago, I installed a manual override keyhole at the very bottom edge, hidden completely behind a rubber weather strip. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete. Pain shot up my thighs. I pulled a small, tarnished brass key from my coat pocket, pushed the rubber strip aside, and slid it in. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying mechanical clack. We slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind us. We didn't dare turn on the overhead fluorescents. We worked strictly by the narrow beams of penlights clamped in our teeth. The garage smelled of motor oil, old leather, and floor wax. The GTO sat in the center, gleaming silently in the dark. I popped the hood. Barnaby wheeled the squeaking cherry picker into position. Unbolting the engine mounts was pure torture. My fingers were stiff, refusing to grip the socket wrench properly. I slipped twice. The second time, my knuckles smashed hard against the firewall. Warm blood welled up, slicking my skin, but I didn't stop. I gritted my teeth, tasting copper, and kept turning the ratchets. Barnaby was a ghost, working the underside of the chassis with terrifying efficiency. "Got the transmission bell housing cleared," he whispered, sliding out from under the car. "Mounts are loose," I breathed heavily, my arms trembling from the strain. We hooked the heavy steel chains to the engine block. Barnaby grabbed the handle of the hydraulic jack and started pumping. The heavy, expensive heart of the Pontiac groaned, shifted, and then lifted inches off the chassis, swaying slightly on the chains. We were halfway there. We just needed to wheel the hoist out the back, drop the engine onto Barnaby's truck, bring in the cracked junker block, and bolt it down enough to fool Lachlan in the morning. "Bring it forward," I whispered, stepping back to guide the swinging mass of metal. Suddenly, the interior of the garage lit up. Two bright, sweeping beams of LED headlights cut violently through the frosted glass of the garage windows, casting long, frantic shadows across the walls. I froze. Barnaby stopped pumping the jack. The heavy V8 hung suspended in mid-air, a 2-ton pendulum caught in the act. The low, familiar rumble of Lachlan's Audi SUV idled in the driveway, right on the other side of the garage door. The gravel crunched loudly as a car door slammed shut. "Dad!" Lachlan's voice called out, muffled by the steel door, but close. Too close. I saw the side gate unlatched. "You awake?" I looked at Barnaby in the harsh, glaring light. The heavy brass wrench in his hand caught the glare. There was no back exit to the garage. There was nowhere to hide a massive engine block hanging from a chain. The brass handle on the side door began to jiggle. The brass handle rattled hard against the strike plate. I held my breath, pressing my back against a stack of dry, rotted tires. Beside me, Barnaby stood dead still in the dark, his grip white knuckled around a heavy crescent wrench. Above us, 2 tons of Detroit iron hung suspended on the cherry-picker chains, swaying just a fraction of an inch. "Dad," Lachlan called out, his voice muffled by the thick steel door. I saw the side gate blowing in the wind. "You in there?" I closed my eyes. My chest burned. If he had his own override key, if he kicked the door, it was all over. He would call the cops, and they would see a father, stripping his son's legal property in the dead of night. A beam from a heavy-duty flashlight hit the frosted glass of the garage window. The hazy light swept over the hood of the GTO, over the empty engine bay, and began climbing up the chains toward the suspended V8 block. Then, my right hand betrayed me. A sharp, shooting spasm ripped through my knuckles. The socket wrench I was holding slipped right through my greasy fingers. Time slowed down. I lunged to catch it, missed, and watched it fall toward the concrete. At the exact same second, the sky cracked wide open. A massive roll of spring thunder rattled the garage roof, shaking the dust from the rafters. The socket wrench hit the floor with a sharp metallic clack, swallowed completely by the deafening rumble of the storm. Outside, Lachlan killed his flashlight. "Whatever," he muttered, his voice barely carrying through the door. "Stubborn old man." Gravel crunched under his loafers as he walked back to his Audi. The door slammed, the engine revved, and the headlights finally swept away from the frosted glass. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for an hour. I looked at Barnaby. He did not say a word. He just spat on the floor, grabbed the handle of the hydraulic jack, and started lowering the engine. The next 4 hours were a blur of absolute physical misery. My joints swelled to the size of golf balls. Every time I had to torque a bolt or pull a vacuum line, it felt like somebody was driving a hot nail under my fingernails. We wheeled the real Ram Air IV block out the side door, using plywood boards to roll the heavy hoist over the muddy grass, right up to the back of Barnaby's flatbed. Then came the ugly part. We hauled in the junk 400 block Barnaby brought from the yard. It was covered in grime, the cylinder head was cracked, and the gaskets were blown out, but it had the right general shape. We dropped it into the GTO's empty engine bay. "It is not going to fool anybody who actually looks," Barnaby grunted, fighting to line up the rusted motor mounts. "It just has to fool Lachlan," I said, wiping a mixture of sweat and motor oil from my forehead. "He does not know a carburetor from a coffee maker. He just knows it is supposed to look big and take up space." We bolted it down. We reconnected the radiator hoses, slapped the original chrome valve covers on the junk block, and hooked up the spark plug wires. It was a cosmetic surgery job, a cheap mask. The engine was not connected to the transmission properly, the fuel lines were plugged with screws, and it sure as hell would not hold a drop of oil. But sitting there in the dim light, under the hood of that beautiful shell, it looked like a finished car. By 4 in the morning, Barnaby strapped the real V8 down in the bed of his truck. He tossed a heavy canvas tarp over it. "I will lock it in the shipping container behind my office," Barnaby said quietly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Nobody goes back there." "Thanks, Barn." You sure about this, Orson? Once that broker sees this mess, your kid is going to catch a world of hell. He brought the fire, I said, staring at the empty driveway. I am just letting it burn. I locked the garage door behind him, went inside, and scrubbed the grease off my arms with Dawn dish soap until my skin was raw. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I fell into bed. I did not think I would sleep, but exhaustion dragged me under like a rip current. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was pouring through the blinds. It was already past 9. I threw off the covers and immediately regretted it. My knees locked up. My hands were completely stiff, the knuckles purple and bruised. I had to use my forearms to push myself off the mattress. I threw on a clean flannel shirt, leaving the buttons undone because my fingers refused to work, and slowly made my way down the hallway. I could hear voices in the kitchen. I stopped at the edge of the doorway. Serafina was standing by the counter, holding a mug of my coffee. She was wearing a crisp white blazer, looking like she was ready for a magazine shoot. Sitting across from her at my dining table was a man I had only ever seen in local magazine ads, Gideon Rourke. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, wearing a sharp navy suit with an open collar. He was tapping a gold pen against a leather folio, looking completely out of place in my cramped, outdated kitchen. "Oh, Orson, you are up," Serafina said, putting on that sweet, artificial voice she saved for an audience. "I hope we did not wake you." Lachlan had to run to the office for a quick meeting, so I am handling the paperwork this morning. I walked into the room, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Who is this, Sarah?" Gideon stood up, offering a firm, professional smile. "Gideon Rourke, Mr. Cale. I am a classic auto broker. Lachlan reached out to me about the '69 Pontiac out in your garage." "Lachlan's car," Serafina corrected quickly, offering Gideon another blinding smile. "Like we discussed. My husband holds the title. We are just keeping it here temporarily because of Orson's health issues." I looked at Serafina. She did not even flinch. She was standing in my house, drinking my coffee, calmly explaining to a stranger that I was too sick to manage my own life. "I see," I said softly, looking down at my bruised hands. "It is a beautiful build from what Lachlan sent me," Gideon said, packing his pen away. "He mentioned you did most of the restoration yourself. It is a shame you have to let it go, but you know how these things are. Sometimes it is better to pass the torch." "Sometimes," I agreed. "Anyway," Gideon said, checking a heavy silver watch on his wrist. "I brought the cashier's check for the agreed amount. 120,000. I have got a flatbed parked down the street. We just need to do the final walk around." Serafina practically vibrated with excitement. You could see the dollar signs reflecting in her eyes. That check was her lifeline. It was the end of the phone calls from creditors, the end of the mortgage anxiety. It was her ticket back to pretending she was rich. "Let us head out there," Serafina said, reaching for her purse. "I have got the new code for the garage." Gideon nodded and picked up his leather folio. "Great. I will check the VIN plates, make sure the interior is solid, and of course I need to hear it run." The kitchen went dead quiet. Serafina stopped with her hand in her purse. "Hear it run?" "Just a cold start," Gideon said, already walking toward the back door. Lachlan said, "It is fully operational. I do not buy six-figure matching numbers muscle cars without hearing the engine turn over. You would be surprised what people try to hide under a shiny coat of paint. Just need the keys, Mrs. Cale." Serafina looked at me, a sudden, panicked deer in the headlights, look flashing across her perfectly contoured face. She did not know anything about cars. She did not know where the keys were, and I knew that if Gideon Rourke turned the ignition on that GTO today, nothing would happen except the grinding clatter of a dead starter motor attached to a hollow block of scrap metal. The lie would end right here, in my driveway. The silence in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. "Hear it run!" Serafina repeated, her voice thinning out. Her manicured hand hovered over her designer purse, frozen. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the garage door, then to me. She didn't know a damn thing about the mechanical state of that car. All she knew was that it represented 120 grand to save her suburban lifestyle. The keys. Right, Lachlan usually handles the garage. Gideon Rourke stood there, his leather folio tucked under one arm, looking at her with a calm, calculating patience. He was a guy who made a living spotting rust under fresh paint. He could smell a lie from a mile away, and Serafina was practically sweating guilt. I needed to step in. If Gideon walked out there right now and turned that key, the starter would just grind against a hollow block of scrap metal. The lie would end in my driveway, and my son would just find another way to sell the shell to a different sucker. I needed Gideon's mechanics to pull it apart in their own shop, on the record. My hands were throbbing, the skin stretched tight over purple, swollen knuckles. I shuffled forward, leaning heavily on the granite island, channeling every bit of my real pain into the performance. "I have the keys, Sarah," I mumbled, letting my voice waver just enough to sound frail. I reached into my flannel pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the heavy brass keyring. I held it out, then deliberately let my grip fail. The keys clattered loudly against the tile floor. Gideon sighed quietly, reached down smoothly, and scooped them up. "Appreciate it, Orson. Let us go take a look." "I need coffee," I muttered, turning my back on them and shuffling toward the glass carafe sitting on the coffee maker. My heart was hammering a hole in my ribs. I needed a distraction, a big one. Something chaotic enough to break Gideon's focus and buy me exactly 40 seconds alone in that garage. I grabbed the handle of the coffee pot. It was full, brewing fresh, just 10 minutes ago. Gideon was standing 2 feet to my left, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive navy suit. I did not think about it. I just let my wrist give out. The glass carafe slipped from my grip and shattered against the edge of the countertop. A tidal wave of scalding black coffee splashed directly across the front of Gideon's tailored trousers and his polished leather Oxfords. "Jesus Christ!" Gideon shouted, jumping back and swatting at his legs. "Oh my God!" Serafina shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth. "Orson, what is wrong with you?" I collapsed against the counter, clutching my chest, breathing in short, panicked gasps. "I am sorry. My hands. The arthritis, it slipped. I could not hold it." "Get some towels," Gideon snapped. His professional veneer completely evaporated. His face was flushed red with anger and pain. He was dabbing furiously at his soaked slacks, trying to pull the hot fabric away from his skin. Serafina practically fell over herself, rushing to the sink, yanking paper towels off the roll and throwing them at him. They were both looking down, consumed by the mess. I did not hesitate. The door to the garage was 3 steps away. I stumbled through it, pulling it shut behind me, plunging myself into the damp, oily gloom of the shop. The GTO sat in the center of the floor, the chrome bumpers gleaming faintly. When I rewired the car last winter, I upgraded the electrical system to handle modern loads. I added an electric fuel pump to prevent vapor lock on hot summer days. I knew exactly where I routed the circuit. I ripped the driver's side door open, threw myself halfway under the steering column, and reached up into the dark nest of wiring behind the dash. My swollen joints screamed in agony as I dug around blind. My fingertips brushed cold plastic. I found the square relay switch for the fuel pump. I gripped it tight, twisted hard, and yanked it out of the socket. I shoved the small plastic cube deep into my pants pocket, just as the kitchen door flew open. "What are you doing in here?" Serafina yelled. She was holding a fistful of wet brown paper towels, looking completely unhinged. "Just getting a rag," I stammered, pulling a dirty red shop towel off the driver's seat. "To help clean the floor." Gideon walked in right behind her. His suit was ruined. The smell of burnt coffee hung heavily on him, mixing with the scent of motor oil. His jaw was locked tight, a muscle ticking violently in his cheek. He did not even look at me. He walked straight past me, slid his tall frame into the driver's seat of the GTO, and jammed the key into the ignition. "Let us just get this over with," Gideon muttered, staring straight through the windshield. He pumped the gas pedal twice and turned the key. The starter motor whined. It was a harsh, metallic grinding noise. Barnaby had done a hell of a job lining up the flywheel in the pitch dark last night, but the engine was just a hollow piece of junk. The starter cranked hard, turning the belts, but there was no fuel hitting the carburetor. It just kept cranking, a hollow, rhythmic wheeze echoing off the concrete walls. Gideon stopped. He pumped the pedal again, harder this time, turned the key. Nothing. Just the endless, wheezing crank of a dead engine. "It is not catching," Gideon said, his voice dropping an octave. He pumped the gas 3 more times, flooding the intake with nothing but air. I stepped forward, gripping the edge of the fender. I let my eyes widen in sheer panic. "The car! What did you do to my car?" "I didn't do anything, old man," Gideon snapped, pulling the key out and stepping out of the vehicle. "It is not getting any fuel." "You broke it," I said, letting my voice crack. I forced a wet, pathetic sob into my throat, leaning heavily over the hood. "I worked on it for 5 years and you broke it. Get away from it." I grabbed his arm. He shoved me off, disgusted, wiping his hand on his ruined pants like I was diseased. At that exact moment, the screech of tires echoed from the driveway. Lachlan's Audi slammed into park outside. The side door flew open, and Lachlan burst into the garage, still wearing his suit jacket, breathless and sweating. He must have realized Gideon was here early and sped all the way from his office in a panic. "What is going on?" Lachlan demanded, his eyes darting from Gideon's stained suit to me standing by the fender, acting like a blubbering mess. "Your father threw boiling coffee on me," Gideon said, his voice lethal. "And your $120,000 car does not start." Lachlan's face went completely white. The blood just drained right out of him. He looked at Serafina, who was hugging her arms and shrinking against the wall, offering him absolutely zero help. "I do not understand," Lachlan stammered, holding his hands up. "It ran perfectly yesterday, I swear to you." "He broke it," I mumbled, leaning against the cold metal of the hood, letting my hands shake violently. "The man in the suit broke my engine. It is ruined." Lachlan rushed over to me, grabbing my shoulders with a grip that was entirely too rough. "Dad, stop! Stop talking!" He practically dragged me away from the car, pushing me toward the door to the house. "Go inside, Dad. Sarah, take him inside, right now." Serafina grabbed my elbow, pulling me into the kitchen. I let her. I shuffled like a broken, defeated man, dropping my chin to my chest as the door clicked shut behind me. But I did not walk away. I stood right by the door, listening through the thin wood. "Gideon, I am so sorry," Lachlan said. His voice was dripping with desperate appeasement. It was the voice of a man watching his life raft float away. He has been having these episodes. The dementia, it makes him erratic. He probably messed with something. The car just sits, you know. It is probably flooded, or it has bad gas from sitting all winter. Gideon was silent for a long moment. I could hear him wiping down his slacks again. "I do not do business like this, Lachlan. This is a circus." I know. "Listen to me," Lachlan said quickly, the panic bleeding through his corporate tone. "Let me have it towed to your shop tomorrow morning. First thing, your mechanics can look it over in a professional bay, away from my father. They can clear the fuel lines, verify every inch of it. I will pay for the tow myself." There was a heavy pause. I held my breath in the kitchen, staring down at the puddle of spilled coffee on the linoleum. "Fine," Gideon finally said. His heavy footsteps echoed on the concrete as he walked toward the garage door. "I will expect the flatbed at my shop by 9 a.m., but let me be absolutely clear with you, Lachlan." "Of course," Lachlan said eagerly. "If that car rolls into my bay, and my guys find out that engine is not the original Ram Air IV block." Gideon's voice was ice cold, cutting straight through the damp garage air. "If you are trying to pass off a swap job, the deal is dead, and you will eat a federal fraud suit so fast it will make your head spin." I closed my eyes. Lachlan did not know a damn thing about cars. He did not know what a casting number was. He just knew what I had told him 2 years ago when I handed him the paperwork. Lachlan let out a short, confident laugh, the laugh of a salesman closing a deal he had no business making. "I promise you, Gideon," Lachlan said smoothly. 100% original guaranteed. 9 a.m. Sharp. The yellow flatbed tow truck backed slowly into the pristine, epoxy-floored bay of Gideon Rourke's classic auto shop. I paid the cab driver, tipped him a $5, and stepped out onto the sidewalk across the street. The morning air was biting, settling deep into my joints. I leaned heavily on the wooden cane Barnaby had tossed me earlier that morning. Inside the bay, under the glaring fluorescent shop lights, Lachlan and Serafina were holding court. Lachlan was wearing a fresh charcoal suit. Serafina had a designer trench coat draped over her shoulders, her fingers tightly gripping a leather clutch. They looked like they were waiting for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. They were waiting for $120,000. I crossed the street, keeping to the edge of the open bay doors. The noise of pneumatic air tools masked my footsteps. Gideon was not in a suit today. He wore a clean black polo and jeans. He walked around the GTO, his eyes scanning the body lines. "Paint is clean," he muttered to a guy in a mechanic's shirt holding a clipboard. "Pop the hood." Lachlan stepped forward, hands in his pockets, trying to look casual. "Like I said, Gideon, she has been sitting a bit, but it is a perfect restoration. Every bolt." Gideon did not answer. He reached under the chrome bumper, unlatched the hood, and pushed it up. He clicked on a heavy-duty penlight. He leaned over the fender, aiming the beam deep into the engine bay, right at the back of the engine block, where the factory casting numbers lived. I watched Gideon's shoulders stiffen. He stood up slowly. He turned off the flashlight. He looked at his mechanic, who was already peering over the other fender. The mechanic shook his head. "Lachlan," Gideon said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Yeah? Everything good?" Lachlan smiled, shifting his weight. "What is this?" Gideon pointed at the engine block. "It is the Ram Air or Fee," Lachlan said, his smile faltering a fraction. "Original motor." Gideon slammed his fist down on the fender. The sound echoed through the whole shop, stopping the air tools dead. Serafina jumped, clutching her purse to her chest. "Do not play games with me," Gideon snarled, stepping right into Lachlan's personal space. "That is not a Ram Air V. That is a junk 400 block. Out of a scrapped station wagon. The cylinder head is cracked down the middle, the gaskets are blown, and the casting codes do not even belong in this decade." Lachlan went ghost white, he stammered, looking at the engine, then at Serafina. No, that is impossible. My dad built that. He spent years on it. You brought me a hollowed-out piece of scrap metal and tried to pass it off for 6 figures, Gideon said, his chest heaving. I told you yesterday what would happen if you tried to pull a swap job on me. I warned you. I did not swap anything. Lachlan's voice cracked. Panic was setting in, stripping away his corporate polish. He looked frantically around the shop. And then he saw me. I was standing just inside the bay doors, leaning on my cane. "Him!" Lachlan yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He did it." "Gideon, listen to me. The man has dementia. He is erratic. He was messing around in the garage last night. He must have ruined it. He must have—" Lachlan trailed off. Even he heard how stupid it sounded. An arthritic old man with a failing mind did not swap a 2-ton cast-iron V8 engine overnight by himself. I walked forward. My knees popped with every step. The shop was dead silent. I stopped a few feet from my son. "Dad," Lachlan pleaded, his eyes begging me to play along, to save him. Tell him you got confused. Tell him you made a mistake." I reached into my flannel jacket pocket. My fingers were stiff, but I managed to pull out a folded stack of papers. I held them out to Gideon. Gideon took them, his brow furrowed. He flipped through the top pages. "That is the original bill of sale for the Ram Air IV block," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Paid for with my own cash 3 years ago. Billed to Orson Kale. The second page is the storage receipt from Finch's salvage. The engine is currently locked in a secure container across town. It belongs to me." Lachlan stared at the papers, his mouth slightly open. "But the title. I have the title to the car. You have the title to a 1969 Pontiac GTO, I said, looking him dead in the eye, and that is exactly what is sitting right there. The shell is yours, Lachlan, but the heart is mine. Serafina let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Lachlan, the balloon payment. It is due on the 15th. The Amex. She put her hands over her face, the reality of their financial ruin crashing down on her all at once. You knew, Lachlan whispered, staring at me like I was a stranger. You set me up. I did not set you up, I said quietly. I plugged a dashcam into the fuse box to check a voltage drop. I heard you and Sarah planning to sell me out to cover your mortgage. I heard you planning to use my medical records to lock me out of my own life. Lachlan flinched as if I had hit him. He had no defense, no corporate buzzwords to spin this. Get this piece of garbage out of my bay. Gideon barked, handing the papers back to me. He pointed a finger at Lachlan. You have 30 minutes to call a tow truck. If it is not gone by then, I am calling the police and pressing charges for attempted fraud. Do not ever contact me again. Gideon turned and walked into his glass-walled office, slamming the door. Lachlan just stood there, completely hollowed out. The arrogant, condescending son who thought he could medically gaslight his father to balance his checkbook was gone. In his place was a man drowning in debt, standing next to a useless piece of sheet metal. Serafina was not looking at him. She was already dialing her phone, her hands shaking violently, walking quickly toward the exit. She was calling her mother. The illusion was over. I did not stay to watch the tow truck arrive. I turned around and walked out of the bay. Barnaby was parked across the street in his rusted F-150, the engine idling rough. I climbed into the passenger seat, resting my cane against the dashboard. He crying? Barnaby asked, shifting the truck into drive. Not yet, I said, looking out the window as we pulled away. But he will. I sold the real Ram Air V engine to a collector in Ohio 2 weeks later. It brought in enough money to pay off the rest of my medical bills and put a comfortable cushion in my retirement account. Lachlan lost the big house in the subdivision. Serafina moved out before the bank even put the foreclosure notice on the door. I have not spoken to him since that morning in the shop. I do not plan to. People think that walking away from family is the hardest thing a man can do. It is not. The hardest part is realizing that the family you thought you had never actually existed. Sometimes, the people who share your blood only see you as a stepping stone, or a safety net, or a piece of scrap metal to be sold off when times get tough. When they show you who they really are, you have to believe them. And then, you have to take your keys and walk away. Thank you for listening to my story. If you ever find yourself backed into a corner by the people you trusted most, remember that you always have a choice. Do not let anyone strip you of your dignity just because you share a last name. Hit that subscribe button and stick around the channel for more stories of people taking their power back. Take care of yourselves.